Suddenly, an arrogant tycoon berates a waitress for correcting the music. Nathaniel challenges her to play piano for $1,000, expecting her humiliation. Eleanor tearfully accepts and flawlessly performs Rachmaninoff, shocking everyone. Nathaniel discovers he humiliated a former piano prodigy, now a waitress after a trauma. Get ready for a twist where the tycoon's guilt turns into pursuit, and the public humiliation leads to the awakening of a love that transcends classes and heals traumas. Watch this story to the end. You will be amazed by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The summer rain poured against the windows of the Palazzo, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan's Upper East Side. Elena Rossi adjusted her black uniform for the third time that afternoon, checking that her bow tie was perfectly aligned. At 26, she had learned that in the places where she worked, impeccable appearance was just as important as efficient service. "Table 12 is calling," shouted Carlos, the maître d', over the noise of the kitchen. Elena nodded and picked up the silver tray, balancing it with the skill of someone who had served thousands of meals over the past 2 years. Her steps were silent on the Italian marble, a skill she developed to avoid disturbing the important clients who frequented the Palazzo. The restaurant was part of the Westbrook Hotels chain, known for its luxury properties around the world. Elena knew that working there was an opportunity that many envied. The salary was better than most establishments, and the tips from wealthy clients helped to pay the bills at the end of the month. Still, each day there reminded her of how far she was from the life she had once dreamed of having. While serving the lobster dish to the couple at table 12, Eleanor heard the familiar sound of the grand piano that decorated the center of the main hall. It was just background music, played by a sophisticated sound system, but the instrument always made her pause for a few seconds. The ebony and ivory keys gleamed under the light of the crystal chandeliers, reminding her of a time when her hands knew each one intimately. "Thank you," murmured the customer, interrupting her reverie. Eleanor smiled politely and walked away, focusing again on her work. She couldn't afford to get distracted, especially not today. Carlos had mentioned that there would be an important business meeting during dinner, and all the employees should be at their best. Back in the kitchen, Elena took advantage of the few minutes of break to drink water and rest her feet. Mariana, a colleague who had worked at the Palazzo for 4 years, approached her with a worried smile. "Are you okay, Elena? You look tired." "I'm fine," Elena replied, forcing a smile. The truth was that she hadn't slept well in weeks. The bills were tight again. The rent on her small apartment in Brooklyn had gone up, and she needed to send money to her aunt in Chicago, who had taken care of her since she lost her parents 3 years ago. Elena had arrived in New York City with little more than a suitcase of clothes and a shattered dream. Before the tragic departure of her parents, she was known in the music world as one of the most promising young pianists in the country. She had won international competitions, performed in renowned concert halls, and even received invitations to study in Europe. But when her family fell apart so suddenly, the music lost all meaning. The piano became a constant reminder of their absence. For months after the loss, Eleanor couldn't even listen to classical music without tears coming. The keys that were once extensions of her fingers became strange, cold. The sheet music she knew by heart seemed written in a language she had forgotten how to speak. "Elena, I need you to cover the VIP lounge tonight," said Carlos, appearing in the kitchen with his usual serious expression. "The owner of the chain will be here with some important investors, Nathaniel Westbrook himself." The name didn't mean anything special to Elena, but she could see from the reaction of the other employees that he was someone important. Carlos continued with the instructions, emphasizing that everything should be perfect, that there could be no mistakes. "He is known to be demanding," added Mariana in a whisper when Carlos walked away. "I heard he has fired people for less than a dropped glass." Elena nodded, accustomed to difficult customers. In 2 years at the Palazzo, she had served politicians, businessmen, celebrities, and people whose names appeared regularly in the newspapers. Some were kind, others arrogant, but she always maintained the same professional posture, discreet, efficient, and invisible when necessary. At 7 o'clock, the restaurant began to get busier. Elena checked her appearance again in the small mirror of the employees' dressing room, pinned her brown hair in an impeccable bun, and headed to the VIP lounge. The area was separated from the rest of the restaurant by tempered glass partitions, creating a more private environment without losing the elegance of the main space. The table was set with the finest china in the house, fresh flowers and candles that created a cozy atmosphere. Eleanor checked every detail. The crystal glasses aligned perfectly, the forks positioned with millimeter precision, the goblets polished until they shone. Everything was exactly as Carlos had demanded. When the first guests arrived, Elena greeted them with a professional smile and led them to the table. They were 3 Asian men, elegantly dressed, who were talking in English about business. They seemed polite and thanked her when Elena served the water and presented the menu. The atmosphere was quiet until Nathaniel Westbrook arrived. Elena recognized him immediately by the way everyone in the restaurant bowed slightly in deference. He was a tall man, in his late 30s, with dark hair perfectly combed and a suit that probably cost more than she earned in 6 months. His blue eyes scanned the room with the confidence of someone who was used to owning everything around him. Eleanor kept a respectful distance as he greeted the investors, speaking with the natural authority of someone born into wealth. His voice was polite, but it carried a tone of superiority that she recognized well. He was the type of person accustomed to never hearing the word no. The night, she knew, would be long. Dinner went by without incident until Nathaniel Westbrook decided to impress his guests with a demonstration of his cultural knowledge. Elena was serving the second course when she heard his voice rising, clearly fueled by the expensive wine he had chosen for the occasion. "You know, gentlemen, I'm a great connoisseur of classical music," he said, gesturing with his glass of Bordeaux. "I've been playing the piano since I was 8 years old. My mother insisted that I develop a refined education, not just a commercial one." The Japanese investors nodded politely, but Elena could tell they weren't particularly impressed. Mr. Yamamoto, who seemed to be the leader of the group, discreetly looked at his watch. "Indeed," Nathaniel continued, "I consider music a universal language of business. It reveals character, discipline, sophistication." He paused dramatically, clearly expecting the others to agree. "Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Liszt, I master all the great masters." Elena finished serving and was walking away when she heard something that made her stop involuntarily. The background music playing softly in the restaurant was performing a piece by Chopin, but there was something wrong. The harmonization was in a minor key when it should have been in a major key. A subtle mistake that only someone with a trained ear would notice. Without thinking, she murmured softly, "Excuse my intrusion, but this rendition of Chopin is in a minor key. To accompany a meal like this, the original major key would be more appropriate." The silence that followed was absolute. Nathaniel stopped with the glass halfway to his lips, slowly turning to look at Elena with an expression of disbelief. The investors also turned to her, surprised by the waitress's unexpected intervention. "Excuse me?" Nathaniel said, his voice laden with a coldness that Elena immediately recognized as dangerous. "Did you say something about music?" Elena felt her blood run cold. She had made a terrible mistake. Intruding on a customer's conversation, especially that of the company owner, was grounds for immediate dismissal. I apologize, sir. I shouldn't have spoken. But Nathaniel didn't seem willing to let it go. The wine, the presence of the investors, and his constant need to assert superiority created a perfect storm. He stood up from his chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. No, please, he said, his voice rising enough for other restaurant patrons to start looking. The waitress apparently understands classical music. How fascinating. He paused, savoring the moment. Tell me, dear, where exactly did you study? Music? At the University of Life? Elena felt her face burn with shame. She could see other employees watching nervously from a distance, unsure whether to intervene. Mariana was at the entrance of the kitchen, with an expression of horror on her face. Mr. Westbrook, I really apologize. Elena tried again, her voice barely a whisper. It was inappropriate of me. But Nathaniel was clearly enjoying the situation. He turned to the investors with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Gentlemen, see how interesting. We have a classical music expert serving our dishes. He gestured dramatically towards the grand piano in the center of the restaurant. Since you demonstrate so much knowledge, why don't you show us your skills? Mr. Yamamoto looked uncomfortable, whispering something to his colleagues in Japanese. It was obvious that they did not approve of the situation that was unfolding. Elena shook her head, desperate to escape. Please, sir, I need to get back to work. Oh no, you're not getting off that easy, Nathaniel said, clearly intoxicated by power and attention. Other customers had stopped eating, watching the spectacle with morbid curiosity. I insist, go to that piano and show us this expertise that you claim to have, or was it just talk to impress? He took his wallet out of his inner jacket pocket and placed some bills on the table with a theatrical gesture. $1,000 if you can play something decent, something that doesn't make our ears hurt. His laughter was echoed by some other customers who had moved closer to get a better view. Elena felt tears burn her eyes. It was an impossible situation. If she refused, she would be seen as a coward and probably lose her job. If she tried to play and failed, the humiliation would be even worse. And if she played well, that would open a door that she had locked 3 years ago. I can't, she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Can't or don't know how. Nathaniel, taunted, clearly satisfied with the power he wielded over the situation. Come on, don't be shy. You were quick to criticize the music that was playing. Now show us how it should be done. The entire restaurant seemed to be watching now. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her, some curious, others embarrassed by the unnecessary cruelty of the situation. Mariana had moved a little closer, as if she wanted to intervene but didn't know how. Elena looked at the piano, the instrument that had been her passion, her voice, her soul for so many years. The keys seemed to invite her and haunt her at the same time. 3 years ago, she had vowed never to play again, never to open that wound that music represented. But now, in the face of public humiliation and the gratuitous cruelty of that man, something inside her began to stir. All right, she said finally, her voice still low but with a newfound determination that surprised even herself. I'll play. Nathaniel's smile widened, anticipating the embarrassment she was about to go through. He sat down again, crossing his arms with satisfaction. Excellent. This is going to be interesting. Elena walked slowly to the piano, each step weighing like lead. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat on the bench, adjusting the height automatically, a gesture she had done thousands of times in her previous life. She looked at the keys, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. The timid and humiliated waitress had disappeared, replaced by someone that Nathaniel Westbrook was about to meet in a way he would never forget. Without further hesitation, Elena positioned her hands on the keyboard and began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 echoed through the restaurant like a whisper that gradually turned into a roar. Elena began slowly, allowing her fingers to rediscover the familiar territory of the keys, but with each measure, her confidence grew, as if waking from a long sleep. The silence in the palazzo was absolute. Waiters stopped halfway between tables, trays suspended. In the air, in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes ceased completely. Even the children at a distant table stopped whining, mesmerized by the music emanating from the piano. Nathaniel, who seconds before had displayed a cruel smile of satisfaction, felt the expression slowly crumble on his face. His mouth opened slightly, and he leaned forward involuntarily, as if he needed to make sure he was really hearing what he was hearing. The wine seemed to evaporate from his system instantly, replaced by a shocking lucidity. Elena's fingers danced on the keys with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. Each note was crystalline, each musical phrase charged with an emotion, so profound that it seemed to come from a place beyond technique. She attacked the most difficult passages of the piece without hesitation, her hands flying over the keyboard with a speed and accuracy that made it clear that this was not luck or amateur talent. Mr. Yamamoto, who until then had maintained a politely neutral expression, felt tears well up in his eyes. He recognized virtuosity when he saw it, and this was something that transcended simple skill. He whispered something in Japanese to his colleagues, who nodded in solemn agreement. Elena lost herself completely in the music. All the pain of the last 3 years, all the longing she carried, all the love she still felt for her parents turned into sound. Tears streamed silently down her face, but her fingers never faltered, never hesitated. It was as if the piece was being channeled through her by a greater force. The second part of the concerto demanded a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of the first, and Elena modulated her interpretation perfectly. The entire restaurant seemed to breathe along with the music, rising and falling with each melodic phrase. Some customers had risen from their tables, approaching discreetly to listen better, as if drawn by a magnetic force. Mariana watched with tears in her eyes, finally understanding why Elena sometimes seemed so distant, why there were moments when she looked at the piano with an indescribable expression. Carlos, the always stern maître d', stood at the entrance of the kitchen with an expression of complete disbelief. Nathaniel felt something strange happen in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. It was a mixture of admiration, shame, and something he couldn't completely identify. For the first time in his life, he was witnessing genuine talent, not bought or inherited, but born from the soul. And he had tried to humiliate that extraordinary woman. Elena reached the climax of the piece, attacking the most technically challenging passages as if they were as natural as breathing. Her hands moved with total independence, the left maintaining the harmonic bass while the right embroidered complex melodies that seemed to tell a story without words. It was then that Mr. Yamamoto stood abruptly from his chair. His colleagues looked at him surprised, but he seemed to have recognized something. With careful steps, he approached the piano, observing Elena with growing recognition. "Impossible," he murmured in English, but loud enough for Nathaniel to hear. "Elena Rossi, the Elena Rossi." The name echoed in the silence between the musical notes, and Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that name. He had read about her in cultural magazines a few years ago, a young pianist who was conquering Europe, winning prestigious competitions, being called a prodigy. And then, suddenly, she had disappeared from the music scene. Elena finished the piece with a delicacy that contrasted completely with the intensity she had demonstrated. The last notes floated through the air like falling petals, and for a moment, the silence was total. No one in the restaurant moved, as if any sound could break the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then Mr. Yamamoto began to applaud. These were not polite claps of thanks, but genuine applause from someone who recognized artistic mastery. His colleagues joined him, and gradually the entire restaurant exploded in applause. People who had never shown interest in classical music clapped with tears in their eyes, touched by something they couldn't completely explain. Elena remained seated at the piano for a few seconds, still processing what she had just done. She had broken a promise she had made to herself 3 years ago. She had opened a wound she had tried to keep closed, but strangely, she didn't feel only pain. There was something else, a feeling of liberation, as if a part of herself that had been buried was finally breathing again. Slowly, she rose from the piano bench and turned to face the audience. Her eyes met Nathaniel's, and she saw in them something she didn't expect. No longer the cruel arrogance of before, but a mixture of shock, admiration, and something that looked like deep shame. Mr. Yamamoto approached her, bowing slightly in a respectful reverence. "Miss Rossi," he said in careful English, "it is an extraordinary honor. I saw you play at the International Chopin Piano Competition in Warsaw 3 years ago. You won first place, but then disappeared. Everyone in the world of classical music wondered what had happened to you." Elena nodded slowly, not trusting her own voice. His words brought back memories she had tried to bury, the weight of expectations, the spotlights, the constant pressure to be perfect. But they also reminded her of something else, the pure love she felt for music before tragedy changed everything. Nathaniel was still sitting at the table, looking at her as if he saw a ghost. The $1,000 he had placed on the table seemed ridiculously small now, an offense to what he had just witnessed. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Elena, regaining her composure, walked to the table and picked up the money with silent dignity. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice still a little hoarse from emotion. Without another word, she headed for the employee's exit, leaving behind a restaurant in complete silence, and a man who had just discovered that he had tried to humiliate one of the greatest artists of his generation. Elena arrived at her small apartment in Brooklyn with trembling legs. Her hands still tingled with the memory of the keys, and she rubbed them compulsively as if she could erase what had happened. She threw herself on the worn sofa and finally allowed the tears to come in full force. She had broken her promise. She had played again. The phone rang insistently for 2 hours, but she didn't answer. She knew they were calls from the restaurant, probably Carlos trying to understand what had happened, maybe even Mariana worried, but Elena couldn't talk to anyone. She needed to process the storm of emotions the performance had awakened alone. The next morning, she woke up with her body aching from sleeping on the sofa. The first thing she did was check the messages on her cell phone. 16 missed calls, mostly from restaurant numbers. But there was also a message from Carlos that made her sit up abruptly. "Elena, I need to talk to you urgently. Come to the restaurant in the morning." The tone was too serious. Elena felt her stomach drop, realizing the possible consequences of her actions the night before. She had intruded on a customer's conversation. She had turned a business dinner into a spectacle. She had embarrassed the company owner himself in front of important investors. It was certain dismissal. She dressed quickly and took the subway to the Upper East Side, mentally rehearsing what she would say to Carlos. Maybe she could explain, apologize, promise it would never happen again. But deep down, she knew there was no explanation that justified what she had done. The restaurant was closed to the public in the morning. Only a few cleaning staff were working in the hall. Carlos was waiting for her in his small office in the back with an expression she couldn't decipher. He invited her to sit down and remained silent for a few seconds that seemed eternal. "Elena," he began finally, "in 15 years working in this business, I've never seen anything like what happened last night." He paused, studying her face. "Do you know who Elena Rossi, the pianist, is?" She nodded slowly, unable to find words. "I thought it was a coincidence of names. But after Mr. Yamamoto confirmed, Elena, you are one of the greatest pianists of your generation. What are you doing working as a waitress?" The question hit Elena like a punch in the stomach. It was the same question she asked herself every day, the question that kept her awake in the early hours. I don't play anymore," she managed to murmur. Carlos leaned forward. "Why? What happened?" Eleanor felt the familiar oppression in her chest. "My parents, they passed away 3 years ago. Music was for them. Without them, it no longer made sense." "But last night, you played," Carlos insisted gently, "and it was extraordinary." "It was a mistake," Elena said quickly, the words pouring out in a torrent. "I shouldn't have done it. I broke all the rules, embarrassed Mr. Westbrook, turned the restaurant into a circus. I know I'm fired, Carlos. I just came to apologize and collect my things." To her surprise, Carlos shook his head. "You're not fired, Elena. In fact, it's quite the opposite." He pulled out a folder of documents. "Mr. Westbrook called this morning. He wants to talk to you." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. He wants to sue me?" "No," Carlos said, looking almost amused. "He wants to apologize and make a proposal." Before Eleanor could respond, the office door opened and Nathaniel Westbrook entered. He looked different from the night before. Less arrogant, more human. His clothes were casual and there were dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept. "Miss Rossi," he said, his voice laden with a respectful formality that hadn't existed the night before. "May I speak with you in private?" Carlos rose discreetly and left the room, leaving them alone. Nathaniel remained standing, clearly uncomfortable. "I need to apologize," he began. "My behavior yesterday was inexcusable. I had no right to humiliate you that way regardless of who you were. But now that I know..." He paused. "Elena Rossi, I read about you a few years ago. You were one of the most promising pianists in the world, and I tried to humiliate you as if you were nobody." Eleanor watched him in silence, seeing something in his eyes that she didn't expect. Genuine shame. "I want to make things right," Nathaniel continued. "I am prepared to offer any compensation you deem appropriate, and more than that, I have a proposal. My family owns a conservatory in upstate New York. It's been closed for 2 years, but I can reopen it. You could direct the program, teach, have an orchestra at your disposal." The proposal hit Elena like a wave. It was everything she had once dreamed of, an opportunity to return to music on her own terms. But it was also everything she had learned to fear. "No," she said abruptly, rising from her chair. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Westbrook, but I can't accept." Nathaniel looked genuinely surprised. "May I ask why?" Eleanor struggled to find words that explained the storm inside her. "I abandoned music for a reason. Last night was a mistake. I can't go back to that life." "But your talent," Nathaniel began. "It's not about talent," Elena interrupted, her voice rising. "It's about pain. Every note I play reminds me of what I lost. Every performance reminds me of how proud my parents were in the audiences. They were my inspiration, my strength. Without them, music is just empty." Nathaniel was silent for a moment. What if it wasn't about performance? What if it was about teaching, sharing your gift with young people who dream of having the opportunity you had? The suggestion touched something deep in Eleanor, but she shook her head. "I can't. I apologize, but I can't." She headed for the door, pausing only to add, "And please, don't contact me again." In the days that followed, Eleanor tried to return to her normal routine, but something had changed. irrevocably. The music she had kept buried for 3 years had awakened and now refused to be silenced again. She heard melodies everywhere, in the noise of traffic, in the sound of the waves at Coney Island, in the conversation of her neighbors. At night, lying in bed, her fingers moved involuntarily, playing imaginary pieces in the air. The performance at the Palazzo had opened a wound, but it had also reminded Elena of who she really was beneath the pain, and that scared her more than anything. 2 weeks after the incident at the Palazzo, Elena was organizing her bills at the small table in her apartment when she heard a soft knock on the door. She wasn't expecting visitors, and the doorman in the building hadn't called announcing anyone. She opened the door cautiously and found an elegant woman of about 50, her graying hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun. "Elena Rossi?" the woman asked with a gentle smile. "My name is Helena Santos. May I come in? I need to talk to you about something very important." Elena hesitated. The name wasn't familiar to her, but there was something about the woman's presence that inspired confidence. "How did you get my address?" "I was a piano teacher for 30 years at Juilliard. When I learned you were in New York, I asked some colleagues for help finding you." Helena paused, her eyes revealing a gentle urgency. "Please, Elena, it's about your parents." Elena's world seemed to stop. No one had mentioned her parents in months, and hearing their names from a stranger left her simultaneously curious and fearful. She opened the door wider, allowing Helena to enter. The small apartment seemed to shrink even more with the visitor's refined presence. But Helena showed no judgment. She sat on the modest sofa and waited for Elena to settle into the opposite chair. "I knew your parents," Helena began softly. "John and Mary were very dear friends of mine. We studied together at Juilliard over 30 years ago." Elena felt her breath catch. Her parents had never mentioned to Helena Santos, but there were many things about their youth that she had never known. "John played the violin. Mary was a singer," Helena continued, her eyes shining with remembrance. "They met during a student concert. John was so nervous that he broke a string on his violin in the middle of the performance, and Mary began to sing a cappella to cover the mistake. It was the most beautiful moment I've ever witnessed." Elena felt tears well up in her eyes. She could perfectly imagine the scene. Her father, always a perfectionist, mortified by the mistake, and her mother, always generous, saving the situation with her sweet voice. "They talked about you constantly," Helena said. "Even before you were born, they already knew you would be special. John called me the day you played the piano for the first time at 3 years old. He was crying with emotion." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked, her voice broken with emotion. Helena leaned forward. "Because you need to know that they never wanted you to abandon music. In fact, they left something for you." Elena frowned, confused. "Left? But I received all their things. Aunt Rose gave me everything that was in the apartment." "Not everything," Helena said gently. She opened her bag and took out a yellowed envelope. "They asked me to keep this 5 years ago when you started winning your first international competitions. They said that if something happened to them, I should give it to you only when you were ready to hear it." Elena looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. "What is it?" "A letter and something else, but Helena paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's something you need to know first. Your parents didn't pass away by accident." Elena's world crumbled instantly. "What do you mean? It wasn't an accident? They crashed their car on the highway to the Hamptons. The police said," Helena shook her head slowly. "John was sick, Elena, terminal cancer. They found out 6 months before the accident, but they didn't want to tell you because you were at the height of your career. They didn't want you to give up music to take care of him." Elena felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "No, that's not true." They would have told me. Read the letter, Helena said softly, handing her the envelope. They explain everything. With trembling hands, Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in her mother's familiar handwriting and a small handwritten score in her father's precise musical calligraphy. The letter began, "My dear Elena, if you are reading this, it is because we were unable to tell you personally what we needed to say." Elena read in silence, tears running freely down her face. The letter explained about her father's illness, about the difficult decision to keep it a secret so as not to affect her career, about how they watched all her performances over the internet when they couldn't be present physically. "We don't want our departure to be the end of your music," one passage read. "Your art is greater than our absence. It is our way of continuing to live in the world." The letter ended with, "In the attached score, your father composed a small, 'In peace for you.' He said it captures everything he feels when he sees you play. The pride, the love, the hope that your music will touch other hearts as it has touched ours." Elena looked at the score. It was a simple but deeply emotional melody, clearly composed by someone who understood the soul of music, even without being a technical virtuoso. The notes seemed to dance on the page, and she could almost hear her father's voice explaining each melodic phrase. "There's one more thing," Helena said softly. "Your parents left a sum of money saved for you. Not much, but enough for you to support yourself for a few months while you decide what you want to do with your life." Elena looked at Helena through her tears. "Why did you wait so long to find me?" "Because I needed to be sure you were ready. When I saw the video of your performance at the restaurant on the internet..." "Una, what video?" Elena asked, surprised. Helena smiled sadly. "Someone filmed it and posted it online. It already has over 1 million views. When I saw that performance, I knew it was time. You weren't just playing with technique, Elena. You were playing with your soul again." Elena felt a revelation grow inside her. Her parents didn't want her to abandon music. They wanted her to embrace it more completely. They had passed away protecting her artistic future, not destroying it. "They knew, didn't they?" Elena murmured. "They knew I would abandon everything if I found out about the illness." Helena nodded. "John said you inherited not only the talent, but also too generous a heart. They knew you would sacrifice your career to be with him in his last months." For the first time in 3 years, Elena didn't feel only pain when thinking about her parents. She also felt gratitude, a deep gratitude, for the sacrifice they made to protect her gift. "What do I do now?" she asked, holding the score against her chest. Helena smiled. "What your parents always knew you would do. You play." Elena spent the next 3 days trying to play the score that her father had composed for her. She set up the small digital keyboard she had bought years ago and never used, but every time she positioned her fingers on the keys, something prevented her from proceeding. The notes seemed simple on paper, but carrying the emotional weight of that music was impossible. On the 4th night, she finally managed to play the complete melody. The piece was beautiful, melancholic, but hopeful, and each chord seemed to contain a message of love from her father. When she finished, she collapsed in sobs that came from a place so deep that it seemed to tear her soul. It was then that she realized the true dimension of what her parents had done. They not only hid the illness, they passed away carrying the weight of lying to the daughter they loved, to protect something they considered greater than themselves. The guilt Elena felt for being alive when they weren't intensified overwhelmingly. On the 5th day after Helena's visit, Elena received an unexpected call. It was an unknown number, but the voice on the other end made her immediately recognize who it was. "Miss Rossi, this is Maestro Robert Silva from the National Symphony Orchestra. The voice was deep, respectful. "I saw the video of your performance at the restaurant. I would like to invite you to be our guest soloist at next month's benefit concert. It's in honor of young American talents who have overcome adversity." Elena felt the apartment spin around her. "Maestro Silva, I don't play professionally anymore." "More what I saw in the video suggests exactly the opposite," he said gently. "Elena, 3 years ago, the music world lost one of its most important voices. I know there was tragedy in your life, but talent like yours cannot remain hidden forever." After hanging up the phone, Elena sat on the floor of the living room, staring at her hands. The invitation was an opportunity that thousands of pianists would kill to have. But accepting meant returning to a world that constantly reminded her of her parents' absence. She tried to call Aunt Rose in Chicago, but it went to voicemail. Mariana from the restaurant had tried to visit her twice, but Elena didn't open the door. She was completely isolated, trapped between the guilt of playing and the guilt of not playing. The following morning, Elena woke up from a nightmare where she was playing in a large theater, but the audience was empty except for 2 empty chairs. In the front row, the places where her parents always sat. In the dream, she played louder and louder, desperate for them to hear her, but the chairs remained empty. She got up trembling and walked to the window. Brooklyn was silent in the early morning, only the sound of the waves breaking on the shore at Brighton Beach. That was when she saw her reflection in the glass and didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. She was too thin, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and a sadness in her eyes that scared her. Elena realized that she was self-destructing. The pain of loss had turned into a prison that she had built herself, and now she no longer knew how to get out. She had used music to punish herself for being alive when they weren't, and then she had used the absence of music to punish herself even more. The next day, she forced herself to leave the apartment. She walked along the boardwalk, trying to organize her thoughts, but each step seemed heavier than the last. She sat on the sand and looked at the sea, remembering how her parents used to bring her to the beach when she was a child, how her mother hummed melodies while they walked along the shore. It was then that a small child approached, carrying a toy guitar out of tune. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, and she sang a children's song completely off-key, but with a joy so pure that it made Elena smile for the first time in weeks. "Do you know how to play for real?" the girl asked, noticing that Elena was watching her. "I used to," Elena replied hesitantly. "Why did you stop?" the child asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Elena was speechless. How to explain to a 5-year-old the weight of guilt, of longing, of the feeling that living fully was a betrayal of the dead? The girl sat on the sand beside her. "My grandma says that when we stop doing things we love, we get sad. Are you sad?" The simple question hit Elena with the force of a revelation. She was sad, deeply, devastatingly sad. But not just because of the absence of her parents. She was sad because she had abandoned the part of herself that they loved most. "Play a song for me?" the girl asked, offering her the toy guitar. Elena looked at the ridiculously small instrument and felt a laugh escape, the first genuine laugh in a long time. "This guitar is too small for me." "Then sing," the girl said simply. And Elena sang. She started with a nursery rhyme that her mother used to sing, then moved on to a melody that her father whistled when he cooked. The girl tried to keep up, completely out of tune but radiant with happiness. It was in that moment, singing on the beach with an unknown child, that Elena finally understood something crucial. The music hadn't passed away with her parents. It had been the gift they left for the world through her. Every time she refused to play, she was wasting the most precious inheritance they had left her. When she returned to the apartment that afternoon, she found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was an old photo, clearly taken decades ago, showing her parents young on a stage with other musicians. On the back, someone had written, "John and Mary Rossi, Benefit Recital for Underprivileged Children, 1995. Elena studied the photo for a long time. Her parents were smiling, clearly happy to use music to help other people. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing beauty with the world. There was also a business card attached to the photo. Helena Santos, piano teacher. On the back, she had handwritten, "Your parents always said that your music wasn't just yours. It was a gift for the world. When you are ready to give that gift, call me." That night, Elena sat down at the keyboard again, but this time she didn't try to play her father's score. Instead, she improvised a simple melody, letting her fingers find their own way. It wasn't perfect. It was rusty after 3 years, but it was music again. And for the first time since her parents' departure, Elena allowed herself to feel something beyond the pain. She felt hope. But when she picked up the phone to call Helena, her hands trembled so much that she couldn't dial the number. The fear of what it would mean to return to music, the terror of disappointing the memory of her parents, the certainty that she was no longer the same person she had been before the tragedy. All of this completely paralyzed her. Elena spent the entire night sitting next to the phone, unable to make the call she knew she needed to make. The next morning, Elena finally found the courage to call Helena. The conversation was brief but transformative. Helena invited her to visit her at her home in Greenwich Village, promising to show her more things that her parents had left in her care. Helena's house was a charming brownstone filled with sheet music, old photos, and 2 pianos, a grand and an upright. The walls were covered with photographs of students she had taught over the years, including several of Elena as a child, which her parents had proudly shared. "There's something I need to show you," Helena said, leading Elena to a small room in the back. There, carefully organized, were hundreds of newspaper clippings about Elena's career, concert reviews, interviews, photos of awards, all meticulously collected and preserved by her parents. "They kept everything," Helena explained. "John would call me after every performance of yours to comment on your interpretation. Mary would send me messages with links to your videos on YouTube. They were your biggest fans." Elena picked up one of the reviews, dated just 4 months before the accident. The headline read, "Young pianist conquers Europe with masterful interpretation of Rachmaninoff." The photo showed her bowing on the stage of the Warsaw National Theatre, holding flowers that the audience had thrown. "I remember this concert," she murmured. "I called them afterwards, but Dad seemed strange. He said he was just tired." "That was when the symptoms started to intensify," Helena said gently. "But he was radiant. He called me that night to tell me how you had played. He said it was the most moving performance of your life." Elena felt a fury rising inside her, not against her parents, but against herself. She had wasted 3 years punishing herself for being alive, when she should have honored their memory by doing exactly what they wanted most, sharing her music with the world. "I want to accept Maestro Silva's invitation," she said abruptly. Helena smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. But I have a condition," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "I want the concert to be a benefit. I want to use the music to help others, as my parents did." In the days that followed, Elena immersed herself in preparation with an intensity that surprised even herself. Her body had lost the physical conditioning necessary for long performances. Her hands no longer had the endurance they once did, but the determination she felt was stronger than any technical obstacle. It was during one of these intense practice sessions at Helena's house that Nathaniel Westbrook appeared unexpectedly. Eleanor was in the middle of a particularly difficult passage when she heard the doorbell. Helena went to answer it and returned accompanied by him, who seemed visibly nervous. "I apologize for the intrusion," Nathaniel said, addressing Elena directly. "I've tried to talk to you several times, but—" "What do you want?" Elena asked, stopping playing but keeping her hands on the keys. "I want to help," he said simply. "I heard about the benefit concert. I want to sponsor the event, completely. No conditions, no expectations of return." Elena studied him carefully. There was something different about him, a humility that hadn't existed on the night at the restaurant. "Why?" Nathaniel hesitated before answering. "Because I discovered who you really are, not just the pianist, but the person. I've spent weeks investigating your history, Elena. I know about your parents, about why you stopped playing, about the sacrifice they made to protect your career." Elena felt the anger explode inside her. "You investigated my life." "Yes, and I hate myself for it," he admitted. "But I needed to understand. I needed to know how someone with so much talent was working as a waitress, not out of cruel curiosity, but because I can't stop thinking about what I did to you that night." "You humiliated me," Elena said, rising from the piano bench. "I know, and it's consuming me." Nathaniel took a step closer, then stopped, respecting her space. "Elena, I've spent my entire life thinking that money and power gave me the right to treat people however I wanted. But you showed me what real greatness is, and you showed me how small I am in comparison." Elena could see that he was being sincere, but sincerity didn't erase the humiliation. "Your guilt is not my responsibility." "Nathaniel, no, it's not," he agreed, "but let me at least try to fix what I can. The concert, the conservatory I mentioned, all of that still stands. Not because I feel guilty, but because I believe you can use these resources for something greater than any of us." Elena looked at Helena, who had watched the exchange in silence. The teacher nodded almost imperceptibly, as if she was encouraging Elena to consider the proposal. "I need to think," Elena said finally. Nathaniel nodded. "Of course, but Elena, there's something else you need to know. When I started investigating your story, I discovered that you weren't the only person your parents helped. They maintained a small scholarship program for underprivileged children to learn music. They paid out of their own pockets, without fanfare." Elena felt the floor move beneath her feet again. Her parents had never mentioned this. "After they passed away, the program ended," Nathaniel continued. "There are 15 children who lost their music lessons because there was no one left to pay. I thought you would like to know." Elena sat down heavily on the piano bench. 15 children. Her parents had used music not only as art, but as a tool for social transformation. And now these children no longer had access to what her parents considered a basic right, the beauty of music. "Where are these children now?" she asked, her voice just a whisper. "Some have returned to the streets. Others work to help their families," Nathaniel said. "But they all remember the music lessons as the happiest moments of their lives." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would change the course of her life. She could continue hiding, honoring her parents' pain, or she could honor their love by doing exactly what they would have done. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at Nathaniel. "If I accept your help, it will be with one condition. I don't just want a concert or a conservatory for the wealthy. I want to rebuild the program that my parents maintained. I want music to be accessible to those who really need it." Nathaniel nodded immediately. "Anything you want." Elena turned to the piano and began to play the melody that her father had composed for her. This time she managed to play it all the way through without stopping, each note charged with determination. She was no longer playing just to process the pain. She was playing to honor a legacy and build a future. But as the music filled the house, Eleanor knew that she was about to face the biggest challenge of her life. In a week, she would be on stage again, exposed, vulnerable, playing not only for an audience, but for the memory of her parents and for 15 children who depended on her to rediscover the magic of music. The night of the benefit concert at Carnegie Hall arrived more quickly than Elena expected. Backstage, she adjusted the simple black dress she had chosen. There was no money for something elaborate, but Helena had lent her a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, creating an understated elegance. "Are you ready?" Helena asked, appearing beside her with an encouraging smile. Elena looked through the small space between the curtains at the audience that was forming. The theater was packed, with people of all ages occupying everything from the most expensive seats to the simplest places. In the middle of the audience, she managed to identify the 15 children whose music lessons her parents had sponsored. They were dressed in their best clothes, eyes shining with expectation. "I don't know if I can do this," Helena murmured, feeling her hands tremble. "Your parents are here," Helena said softly. "Not physically, but in every note you're going to play, in every child who will be inspired by you tonight, in every life that music will touch through your talent." Maestro Silva approached, elegant in his tuxedo. "Elena, it's an honor to have you with us. The orchestra is eager to accompany you. Would you like to warm up?" Elena shook her head. She had practiced obsessively for a week, and now more practice would only increase her anxiety. "I'm ready." The lights in the theater went out and Elena walked onto the stage. The grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, and when she sat on the bench, automatically adjusting the height, she felt a strange calm descend upon her. It was like coming home after a long journey. She had decided to play 2 pieces. First, the Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 that she had played at the restaurant, a choice that publicly acknowledged the moment that changed everything. Then, as an encore, the simple melody that her father had composed for her, arranged for orchestra with the help of Maestro Silva. The first notes of the Rachmaninoff echoed through the theater, and Elena surrendered completely to the music. This time, she wasn't playing out of desperation or humiliation, but out of pure love. Each musical phrase carried 3 years of longing, transformed into beauty. Each chord was a declaration that life continued, that love continued, that music was immortal. In the audience, Nathaniel watched mesmerized. In the week since the incident at the restaurant, he had transformed profoundly. He had begun to treat his employees with genuine respect. He had studied classical music with the humility of a beginner. He had discovered that true greatness didn't come from power, but from purpose. The 15 children in the audience could barely blink. For them, Elena wasn't just a pianist. She was living. Proof that dreams were possible, that music could elevate anyone, regardless of their background. Elena finished the concerto with an intensity that left the theater in absolute silence for several seconds. Then, like a wave, the applause began and turned into a standing ovation that lasted more than 5 minutes. People wept openly, touched by something that transcended entertainment and became a spiritual experience. But Elena hadn't finished. She rose and walked to the microphone that had been positioned next to the piano. "Tonight is special for me," she said, her voice echoing clearly through the theater. 3 years ago, I lost my parents, John and Mary Rossi. With them, I thought I'd also lost my music. But I recently discovered that they didn't want me to stop playing. They wanted me to use music to continue the work they had begun. She paused, looking directly at the 15 children. "My parents maintained a scholarship program so that underprivileged children could learn music. When they passed away, the program ended. Today, I want to announce that it's back." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. "But not only that," Elena continued, her voice growing in strength. "With the generous help of Mr. Nathaniel Westbrook and teacher Helena Santos, we are opening the John and Mary Rossi Conservatory, where music will be free for any child who dreams of learning. The audience exploded in applause again, but Elena raised her hand to ask for silence. Now, I want to play one last song. It's a piece that my father composed for me, which speaks about how love continues even when people pass away. It's for all the parents who sacrificed so that their children could follow their dreams. Elena sat down again at the piano and began to play her father's melody. The simple piece was transformed by the orchestra into something majestic, but it maintained the original emotional intimacy. It was music that told a story of unconditional love, of sacrifice, of hope that survives loss. When the last notes faded, Elena rose and looked at the audience. At the back of the theater, she could have sworn she saw two familiar figures applauding. Her parents, finally proud not only of her technique, but of her choice to use music to honor their memory and help others. 2 years later, the John and Mary Rossi Conservatory had become a national reference in music education for underprivileged children. Elena directed the program with the same passion that she had once dedicated to international competitions. But now, with a deeper purpose, Nathaniel, transformed by the experience, had become not only a sponsor, but a student. He took piano lessons with Elena on Thursday afternoons, progressing slowly but with genuine dedication. Between them had grown something more than friendship, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. At the graduation ceremony of the conservatory's first class, Elena played her father's melody again. This time, there was no pain in the notes, only gratitude. She had finally understood that honoring her parents' memory didn't mean stopping living, but living in a way that they would be proud of. When the music ended and the children ran to hug her, Elena smiled, knowing that her parents were finally at peace, and so was she. Dear listeners, we hope that Elena Rossi's journey has touched you deeply, just as her music has touched so many lives. Her story reminds us that even in the greatest losses, we can find purpose, and that our talents are gifts meant to be shared with the world. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special selection of equally inspiring stories. Find our complete playlist by clicking to the left. If Elena's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day, we bring unique narratives that explore the strength of the human spirit and the beauty of new beginnings. Don't miss our upcoming content, and we hope to see you in the comments sharing your own stories of overcoming and love for music.